that's Melchizedekian, and the only way to worship God is triadic because Jesus is the eternal priest offering the worship in heaven. So unless you're united to Jesus, the Melchizedekian high priest, you're not worshiping the Father, even if you think you are. It's vain and futile. That's what they don't understand, because they don't know that Islam doesn't have temples, priesthoods, altars, sacrifices, or heavenly liturgy. And if you don't have the divine person of the Son of God in human nature as a Melchizedekian priest offering in heaven, you don't have the Father. All right, now he's going to quote a bunch of Protestant stuff. I don't really care about Martin Luther and Protestant stuff.
Of Abraham. Note the qualification. Muslims profess or claim to have the faith of Abraham.
No, it does not say that. It says that in one place. It says they profess to have it here. However, in Nostra Aetate, it says they do have it. They take pains to submit wholeheartedly even to God's indisputable decrees, just like Abraham, with whom the faith of Islam takes pleasure in liking itself submitted to God. So notice the contradiction between the Nostra Aetate statement and the Lumen Gentium statement. Here it says they do adore the one true God, and they do submit to God's decrees just like Abraham. So it says both things, Trent. It doesn't just say they think they have it. It says both. And it says they worship God. Now remember, they tried to play a word game, many of them, that, oh, it doesn't actually say worship. It uses the word adore. That's different. Oh, but it uses worship in the last sentence of 3, doesn't it? Oops. Oh, that doesn't work. Uh-oh.
But they don't actually have that faith because the Quran is an uninspired distortion of the Old and New Testament delivered by a false prophet. I covered this in my episode on why I'm not a Muslim, linked in the description below.
If it's a uninspired distortion from a demon, then the God of that inspiration is also, by extension, a false God.
Real fast. At this point, a lot of people would say in a video, here's a word from our sponsor. But I love that our supporters are so generous. They did not honor him as God or give thanks to him, but they became futile in their thinking and their senseless minds were darkened. St. Paul assumes a person can not only worship God if they don't know he is a Trinity, but a person is morally required to.
There's nothing in that passage that gives the indication that Paul is saying that you can still worship God without knowing that he's triune. In fact, in Acts 17, he actually says the word is near you, even in your heart. He actually references Christ, not a generic Unitarian God. How do I know that? Well, let's look at the passage here. He says, as I walk through the Areopagus, men of Athens, I perceive that you're very religious. The word there is also superstitious in some of the translations. For as I was passing through, I considered the objects of worship, and I found an altar. Paul is talking about idols. He's talking about how superstitious the Greeks were, and then that he found an idol to the unknown God. Paul is using a pedagogical teaching example through finding this altar. He is not saying, if you read, as we saw earlier in Romans 1, that the pagan Gentiles here are actually worshiping the one true God because they had an altar called unknown God. That totally reverses and changes the whole meaning and point of this passage. He's saying that although you ought to have known God, you don't. You failed and you worship things that are not God. Notice he says in verse 29, after he talks about this, he says that God made all the nations and set up their appointed boundaries and the times of their dwellings so that they might seek him. Not a generic Unitarian God. So Trent keeps assuming that the God that's mentioned in this passage is a generic Unitarian deity. It's not. In fact, the God, Paul says, is Jesus here, in the hope that we might grope for him and find him, although he is not far from each of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. This is talking about the Logos, right? Because in Colossians 1, Paul uses the same terminology about Christ, that in him we live and move and he sustains everything by his word, who is the Logos. So in him, who's the him that we live and move and have our being? Well, in Colossians 1, it's Jesus. It's not a generic Unitarian God. Some of your poets have said, we are his offspring. Paul is using a rhetorical device of saying that even pagan poets have pointed out that we're children of God, but we're not children of Zeus. Paul is saying that You're not knowing or understanding who you're worshiping. Zeus is a demon. Zeus doesn't have offspring. He doesn't have children. You don't know that Yahweh is the one true God and we are his offspring. So this would be like saying if a Satanist says, I am a son of Satan and he makes me divine. And I say, you're right to say that we become sons of God and divine, but not through being children of Satan or Zeus. That's what Paul's point is. That's why it's not the known God, it's the unknown God. And the Roman Catholics are literally taking this passage and saying, well, Paul actually means that he's the one they know because they have an altar and it says unknown. Are you that dumb, really? In Romans 1, he says they don't know him. They exchanged the worship of that God for false worship. Then he says, therefore, since we are the offspring of God, we should not liken the divine nature to idols, the very thing that they've done, thus invalidating their worship. It's idolatry. God doesn't accept idolatrous worship. He didn't accept Nadab and Abihu. God overlooked their ignorance. So wait a minute, I thought they weren't ignorant. I thought they knew, because Trent just said they knew and worshiped a Unitarian God. But Paul says, no, you're ignorant. Because he has appointed a day in which he will judge the world by this God. Who is the God in this passage according to Paul? The man whom he raised from the dead is the God. So the irony is that the God of this passage, according to Paul, is Jesus, not a Unitarian God. And all the Roman Catholic argumentation stops around here and tries to make this, or no, it stops at 28. It tries to make this a proof of generic theism, leaving out 29 and 30 and 31, where Paul flips the script and says, no, your demon that you think makes you a child of God and gives you divinity is a false God. It's a demon. The real one is the man Jesus Christ, who is God. That's the point of the passage. You can't stop at 28, as these idiots are doing, this dishonest nonsense, and ignore 29, 30, and 31. Jesus is the Logos, not Marcus Aurelius's Logos. It's the same word. That's the same word. That must be the same thing. The same word. It's the same thing.
Worship God and give him thanks as the one creator. Those who sacrifice to idols worship demons because idols represent finite creatures, not the true uncreated God.
Oh, wait a minute. So does the Kaaba and all of the ideology of the Muslims also represent a demon? So you see, Trent is confusing the idea of idolatry only being something external and a statue. Trent, aren't heresies also mental idols and thus impediments to truly worshiping God? That's the point that they don't understand. All right, let's skip ahead here. Oh, here he's going to play me. Let's see what he says. The Samaritans are Unitarians. It's the same fundamental ontological position as Islam, right? They're Unitarian. Jesus says, you worship what you don't know. So the true sense here of what matters in terms of worship and adoration.
So she does worship it.
But the point is that she doesn't know it. They think this was some kind of own. It's not an own, because the point of the passage is that it doesn't matter that you know about him or that you think that you're worshiping the one true God. That's the point. That's why they've shifted the debate into you worship between whether they worship God to do they think they're worshiping God. That's what they've done. The woman at the well thinks she's worshiping God, but she's not. That's the point. You worship what you do not know. We worship what we know, for salvation is of the Jews. So you can worship all day long an idol, a statue, a heretical idea, and think that it's God, but it's not. That's the point of the passage. So every time we go to these passages, the Roman Catholics are literally giving it the opposite point and meaning of the passage. They're saying, but she did worship, but she doesn't know God. So the point is not just, do I have an abstract knowledge? Do I assent to propositions? Because she thinks in her mind, I'm worshiping the God of Jacob. Jesus has the God of Jacob. This is in the mind of the woman at the well, right? I worship the God of Jacob. The Jews claim to worship the God of Jacob, but we're the true worshipers of the God of Jacob. Jesus is saying, you think you worship the God of Jacob, but you don't. Because you can only worship God in the temple at Jerusalem, not at the Samaritan altar that the king created in the book of Kings. That's a false altar and a false God and a false worship. So you don't know what you worship. And the Roman Catholics are saying, yeah, but because she worships something, she does know it. That's how stupid this is. They adore in a natural act of adoration the same God. We don't even have this nonsense in the Orthodox Church. A natural act of adoration. I don't even know what that is. Let's move on. Don't care what Gavin Ortland says. Don't care what he thinks about Gavin Ortland.
25 years after the crucifixion, when unconverted Jews weren't just ignorant of Christ, but openly rejected him. And yet Paul still says the Jews have zeal for God, and not something else like a demon. This description would also apply to Muslims who show zeal for...
Paul says they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. Just like the woman at the well, believes she has a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. So let's go back to the idea of knowing, right? In the Bible, we have different senses of the word know. When we think about, for example, Adam knew his wife Eve, and they conceived. That's the intimate union sense of truly knowing. That's different than knowing about God or knowing about someone or knowing about somebody's wife or whatever. That's very different. It's two different senses. And that's in the scriptures because we've all heard Adam knew his wife Eve, right? So when we're talking about knowing God, we can equivocate on knowing in a general abstract sense or knowing about versus knowing in an intimate, unitive, worship, mystical union sense. In the Orthodox liturgy, we are not just knowing about God, we are knowing God in a synthesis, synergy sense. We are synergizing with God. We are participating in his uncreated grace, really and truly. Again, the easiest way to just dismiss all of this, think of Jake, the Muslim metaphysician. We've done debates, we've argued with him, we've had, he was in the Discord for a long time. He learned and studied a lot of Orthodox Trinitarian theology and Roman Catholic theology. So I would say amongst the Muslims, as far as I'm aware, Jake knows more about the Trinity, or he knows the positions more accurately, or perhaps Dr. Khalil. Between those two, they know it the best. They know about the Trinity. They know about the deity of Christ, and they probably could state our views pretty well. Does that mean they know God and worship God and love God and adore God in the true sense? Of course not. This is so silly that we even have to debate this. They don't, because they are in a religion that explicitly rejects the Trinity and the deity of Christ. So they don't worship and know in the relevant, true, proper sense. Let's look at the Quran. Every Muslim that becomes, every person that converts to Islam makes their statement of the profession of faith, which is implicit and sometimes explicitly a rejection of the Trinity and the deity of Christ. O people of the book, do not go to extremes regarding your faith. Say nothing about Allah except the truth. The Messiah, Jesus, son of Mary, is no more than a messenger of Allah and the fulfillment of his word through Mary, and a spirit created by the command from Allah. Jesus is a creature. He's not the divine son of God. And this is a basic pillar of Islam. So, believe in Allah and his messenger. Do not say Trinity. Stop for your own good. Allah is only one God. Glory to him. So do you understand that Islam is not like the pagans in the sense of knowing or not knowing? They're not in a state of invincible ignorance, as the Roman Catholics argue. They're actually explicitly creating a religion based on Tawheed, or what they think is Tawheed, which is rejecting the Trinity and the deity of Christ. The religion is built on that, you idiots. It is not like an invincible, ignorant guy on an island, pagan. Now, from another perspective, from the Orthodox perspective, it doesn't really matter in terms of grace and salvation and worship, whether you're a pagan or a Muslim, because they both don't count. That's the point. Romans 1, 1 John 2, John 5, John 8, whether you're a pagan, a Unitarian, a polytheist, a Satanist, they all don't count. It doesn't matter, because it only takes one error or heresy or schism to cut you off. That's what they don't understand. It's not a let me stack up and get 80% of the worship of God. I'm going to worship 90% of God via accepting 9 of the 10 attributes, and then I'm good. The Roman Catholic Church itself taught, as we saw in Satis Cognitum and Mystici Corporis, that any one heresy severs you from the mystical body and the worship and grace of God. One heresy, one rejection. So if you're anti-Trinitarian, you're already out. It doesn't matter. The religion is premised on anti-Trinitarianism. And every Roman Catholic I've ever heard says Jehovah's Witnesses don't count. Then Muslims don't count. And you just contradicted yourself on your Vatican II documents. We've got a double-barrel Trent slaying in the past couple weeks. This is great. Both Trents, ba-boom, gone, baby. Weak sauce. And if you want to support the stream, you can do so via Super Chats. I'm going to go to Super Chats in just a second. Let's see where he goes next. Oh, look at this. Why is he quoting this random, cardinals from L'Osservatore Romano, which is a newspaper? One cannot consider Mormon doctrine a heresy. The teaching of Mormons has a completely different matrix. Really? Are you sure about that? Because as we saw, they're not actually as far off compared to the Muslims like you think. This is how ignorant Trent is of Islamic teaching, by thinking that, well, actually Mormons are way further away than Muslims are. Wait a minute. A Mormon can affirm the proposition, Jesus Christ is the Messiah and the divine Son of God the Father, and I worship the Spirit. Do you know a Mormon can say that phrase? Isn't that closer in terms of the phrase itself, closer to our position as Trinitarians and believers in Jesus' divinity? Well, the proposition itself on its surface sure is closer. But wait a minute. All of the meanings of the terms, according to what Mormons think, cancel it out according to these goobers. Oh, so wait a minute. Mormon errors cancel it out. But when Muslims make exactly identically wrong, radically different meanings for creator or omnipotent or cause, first cause, it doesn't cancel out. This is a double standard hypocrisy, because their whole position is a double standard hypocrisy. It's all ad hoc and contradictory. When a Mormon says creation, he means God the Father, who's a man, working with pre-existing matter that's eternal. When a Muslim says creation, it means Allah creating good and evil, and that good and evil, I can't make sense of that, but that's what the Quran says. Allah creates evil and wills it to exist. I'm not kidding. And that Allah at every second destroys and recreates the world. That's occasionalism. On what basis is that idiocy somehow closer to the Mormon idiocy? They're both bad. By the way, Roman Catholics love Aristotle. Aristotle holds to the Mormon view that matter is eternal. It's all arbitrary. And look at that goblin there. And look at this old goblin he's citing here. Just look at that dude. That dude's face alone is enough to show me that this isn't true. Is that Vatican II causes the ambiguity by saying that Muslims worship, adore the one true God and know him. That ambiguity leaves it open as if that worship is accepted and that it is a genuine pipeline to God.
But if it's ambiguous, that means it doesn't have to have this problematic meaning.
No, I said that it's ambiguous and it's wrong. It can be both. Some statements can be ambiguous. And what I was talking about that was ambiguous was the statement plan of salvation. Now, again, I want to thank Michael Lofton for coming in clutch. MC Lofton helped us out with this because I wasn't even aware of this 1997 Vatican document. What I'm talking about is ambiguous, is plan of salvation includes those that acknowledge the creator. That phrase alone is ambiguous because it could mean that Muslims are saved in Islam. It could mean that Muslims too can be saved through Christ coming out of Islam. The passage itself right there is ambiguous. So I don't know what they meant by that. The sense that I think it has is that Islam is salvific. And we are confirmed in that reading, which also refutes Trent. Thank you to MC Lofton, who came to the rescue. This is so helpful. And I'm so thankful to my boy Loft Dog. I'll forgive all of those carbohydrate sins because he gave us such a blessed gift in this 1997 Vatican document, clarifying what's meant in Vatican II. What is meant there? The Spirit of Christ is present in the religions, and you cannot rule out that he's saving people in Islam through Islam. The religions are salvific as such. So there we go. That's what Vatican II means right there. And when John Paul II speaks to the Muslims in Casablanca and Morocco in 1985, that's what it means. So when I said it's ambiguous, I'm talking about certain passages being ambiguous. And I was also talking about what sense we mean by worship and adore, because our opponents in that debate were shifting it to be about sense and referent linguistically. That's not what the debate was from Timcast that made this a huge issue. The debate was about worship, love, and adore, not linguistic referent. I don't care if you want to debate linguistic referent, that's fine. And that's what FDA took upon himself to argue in the debate. I argued the magisterial contradiction position, which they agreed to and then wouldn't address. So now we are going to go to open calls. That's about enough of the Trent video, I think. I'm going to go TT in the little girl's room.